This is Debbie, and welcome to another brand new episode of The Offbeat Life, where I speak to inspiring individuals who ditch the norm to live their best life and become location independent. It's official, it's the holiday season, and that means lots of traveling. So this December, I'm really excited to share that I will be giving away a $250 Delta gift card. Make sure to visit theoffbeatlife.com. Again, that's theoffbeatlife.com to enter for a chance to win. My guest today is the very talented Meagan Morrison, who is the creator of Travel, Write, Draw. Meagan knew she wanted to be a fashion illustrator, but also wanted to incorporate her other interests and passion in travel and writing to her art. She discovered that there was really no jobs that fit this niche, so she did what many thought to be impossible. She forged her own path by creating her blog, Travel, Write, Draw, which combined all of her passions. Today, Meagan has successfully created a new niche in the industry that has allowed her to travel, write, and create fashion illustrations for magazines, hotels, and personal collections all over the world. I was lucky enough to have met Meagan and interview her in her gorgeous apartment in Brooklyn, and I hope you enjoy this interview as much as I do. Hey everyone, I'm here with Meagan, and she is so kind enough to have me in her incredible place, and I get to see all of your work in person, so I'm so excited. So Meagan, can you fill in the gaps of your story and why you live an offbeat life?
I think most people know by now that I'm from Canada. I grew up north of the city, was always into fine art when I was little and through high school. Never really knew how to marry my love of fashion and art together when I was younger. I went to business school first after high school. For college, I did business. And then when I got out of that, I was just itching to get back to art and fashion and kind of find my place in this industry. So I launched my career in Toronto. I was interning at our big fashion publication there in the editorial department and styling, helping stylists on the shoots and steaming samples and calling New York to get in gowns and stuff. So it was very cool, but I just couldn't really see myself in any of the departments because there was just no hand painting going on whatsoever. So it took me a minute with a lot of different jobs within 2 years to kind of find the niche of fashion illustration. And then once in a conversation with a coworker who happened to do publishing on the side, and she suggested, why don't you look into fashion illustration? And I found, a 2-year associates at FIT that offered that program, applied, saved for a year for my tuition, got in and moved here in 2009 and have been building ever since. I think a lot of people, I came here, I had 1 year here as a student without the blog, and then I launched it in the start of September 2010. So a lot of people who obviously know me now have kind of followed from that stage on or have picked up over the last few years. But yeah, Travel, Write, Draw was born out of this love of wanting to kind of live out my passions for the rest of my life. And it's taken me on a very wild ride ever since. And I guess that's how I live the offbeat life, is living this, it's not a uniform cut and paste type of position. There's no job description for the traveling illustrator, on Wikipedia or whatever. It just doesn't exist. I had to create it. So, and I'm continuing to create and refine it as I go. Yeah. And I think what also kind of leads to an offbeat life is just that no 2 days are alike. I don't, have one office. It could be here. It could be in a different country. It could be in a different coffee shop or in a brand's office, or there's no 2 days are the same.
So let's go back to when you first realized that you wanted to be an illustrator and you wanted to combine your love of traveling and writing and also being an illustrator, because you didn't really see a lot of that. I mean, there were illustrators, obviously, but not in a combination that you had. What made you realize that that was what you were meant to do, like your passion and your purpose? And how did you do that?
Yeah, it's a really good question because I often, especially now that I'm so many years into this, like look back to that time and to remind myself, like, why did I do this? Because it's crazy. But at the time, 2008 was the big recession in the US. So it was kind of a good time to take a step back and change focus in my career if I was going to go back to school, because, you know, things were in a bit of a shift anyways. And that was also around the time that blogs were starting to like come into inception, you know, like people were starting to go on their own offbeat journeys of, you know, creating their own roles and careers through social media. So by my second year, I'd always loved travel also. I mean, that didn't come out of nowhere either. I think I was born with a wanderlust and raised with this appreciation for like getting outside your comfort zone. But at the time when I wanted to start the blog, I was reading Garance Duray a lot, who is like, you know, one of the more well-known illustrators who has now turned into like a lifestyle brand, the Sartorialist, and, you know, other illustrators who had their illustration blogs. And I'd just gone to Dubai that summer, was really inspired by being in this new city that was so far from anything that I knew, and wanting to talk about the things I was seeing, not just illustrate them or photograph them. Like I wanted to be able to have a conversation about all of that I was experiencing. So when I got back from that trip that summer, this is just before September 2010, I started, you know, getting my notebook out and thinking like, okay, like I'm going to start a blog. Like, and and what I really want to talk about and what I really want to do for the rest of my life is travel and illustrate from my journeys with this kind of fashion angle, you know? So it's always been this like overlap of the travel, art, fashion via illustration, and it continues to like evolve and refine from there.
So when you decided that you wanted to do this and you wanted to pursue it, what was the first step that you took in order to realize that goal and dream?
Yeah, so it took me a minute to kind of come to terms with putting myself out there in that way, because I think it's one thing to put your portfolio out there, but when you launch a site where people can leave opinions in a public forum type space, it's nerve-wracking. And so, you know, I started to take notes about, you know, refining like what I want to do for the rest of my life, writing down words, the things that really stuck and resonate, and then sharing it with my family and sort of inner circle of friends and using them as a sounding board. Like, what do you think? Like, how does this sound? But ultimately it came down to like what felt right. And the funny thing is around the time that I did launch Travel Write Draw, Eat Pray Love had just come out, and a lot of my friends were like, don't name it Travel Write Draw, like it just sounds too much like Eat Pray Love. And like now no one would even think about Eat Pray Love just because it's 3 words. It doesn't, you know, and that's not at all like, I'm not Elizabeth Gilbert. So I got pushback too, but I think it really comes down to like, you just gotta go with your gut instinct and what you believe in and what makes you excited, and start small. Like I set up the blog, but I don't even think it was necessarily public for the first few weeks that I had it there. And as an illustrator by nature, I could like illustrate my logo and the little icons and things I wanted to put on the early blog.
Knowing what you know now and going through everything that you've gone through, what has been the biggest misconception that people thought about you and your work that are just not right?
Yeah. I don't know. I clearly don't know everything that everyone thinks about me. But I would say, you know, some feedback that I do get is like, you make everything look so effortless. Like, you know, you just go from this place to that place and this project and that project, and like you're switching time zones, which, you know, I don't even know how I do it sometimes, like, and adjust, and then burnout is real. So I think that the misconception is that like it's all just very effortless and comes so easily, or that when people ask about the travels, like I get a lot of emails and people saying like, who's funding this? Like, how are you living this lifestyle? And like, there is a lot of smoke and mirrors to social media. That's kind of like maybe one of the downsides of social, is that it can reflect something that's not totally true. I don't think it would serve me or my followers to necessarily like post an inundation of like bad moments on my feed. Like I think part of what people are drawn to is the optimism and the positivity and like that empowerment and, keep going, keep striving. But I try to also be like, keep it as real as possible, because I don't want people to have these misconceptions about it being easy, because it's absolutely not. I'm split 16 different ways on any given day, if not more, and to keep it all going. And there are definite compromises that come with a life like that. Like I absolutely do not have it all. I think this idea of like, oh, you're living the life, you're living the dream. And I'm like, it's not a dream. This is very real. This is a grind. I'm obviously very grateful. I've had a lot of amazing opportunities and, perceived successes or accolades, whatever, but it was not without a massive hustle behind the scenes and years. Like people only really came to know Travel Right Draw in a much larger way in the last 3 years. But as I said, the blog started in 2010. So there was a good, however many, 4 years that like it was known in maybe the intimate illustration community, but not on a large scale. My dad has a saying that like it took him 30 years to be an overnight success, because no one considers how many years. Suddenly it seems like it happened overnight, but in reality it didn't.
We usually just see the middle or the end of somebody's career, but we never realize that between all of that is all of the hustle and the struggle. Right. And a lot of times we see it on paper and it looks really beautiful and perfect, and then the other side of it is a lot worse.
I think I watch a lot of these like artist biographies, like be it Lady Gaga or whatever, and just like the years that they were playing in these small venues in New York City, or just to get people to be aware of what they're doing. And then even when they have critical mass success, how much pressure is on their shoulders that they're going to let down their fan base if they go in a different direction with their music. Or it's never without pressure. Yeah. There's always a struggle of some kind. And it's just learning to live with it and to compartmentalize it so that it doesn't take you over.
When you start to become successful, and there's a lot more responsibilities to that. And I think we also don't think about that. We just see, oh, this is what I'm going to get to do. But then we also have to realize that there's more responsibilities. There's people that work for you. The clients are bigger, so it's much more harder to please them. In the beginning, when you start, you're just pleasing yourself, essentially, because you're doing what it is that you want to do in your dream, and then you start getting big clients, right? Mm-hmm. So when you first started, and then to now even, have you ever felt that kind of imposter syndrome where,
Yeah, I still do. I'm like, is this really even real? Like, part of what I struggle with, to be totally honest, is because I've diversified what I do, is feeling almost a bit like a jack of all trades, master of none. Like, I do believe in my artwork and my voice and what I'm contributing in the space. But when you start to enter a few different arenas, it's harder to become an absolute expert at one thing. I don't work every single day at my art. I don't work every single day at my like writing for travel or my like editorial eye in fashion. I mean, that in some ways gives me a bit of a complex about feeling like I'm not the best artist that I can be. I mean, I think even when you're just an artist, I think a lot of that's a common feeling that people have, is like, my work is not good enough. There was a long time, especially because my Instagram, like, it was a featured account, a suggested account 3 years ago. So it was almost like a seemingly, like, it just happened overnight. Like I went from 8,000 followers to over 100,000 followers in 3 weeks because I was like recommended on the platform. So I kind of felt like a fraud in a way, like I didn't organically grow 100,000 over the course of like 3 years. It was 3 weeks. And so all of a sudden I went from being this like little niche illustrator and I had a very, very tight niche community to suddenly it's like blown out of the water. And the people who really were like diehard engaged maybe didn't feel as closely connected to me and the content anymore because it was like, oh, well, now she has 100,000 followers. We don't need to comment or like, or we feel further from her.
So talking about social media and Instagram, what has that played on your career?
My blog started to feel overly curated. Like I wouldn't post anything unless it was a completely finished post with finished artwork. Like there was no sort of behind the scenes feeling type content anymore. And so Instagram became the alternative to that, where I could come home at the end of working a long day and feeling tired and do like a 5-7 minute sketch and share it or show like an in-between moment. Because back then, I mean, the user base was so much smaller and it was sort of with the intention of like these instant, of the moment things. It wasn't a backlog of like thousands of photos from previous trips or photo shoots that that like it is today. And so that was what helped me transition really out of like full-time for a company to working for myself. Like Instagram helped me to then work quicker, get this really engaged community. I was located more directly by designers because if I drew their stuff, I would be regrammed, and all of a sudden I started getting like emails from different brands from across the world and different magazines because they were discovering my stuff on Instagram, which was amazing. I mean, now it's such a saturated space that it's harder to get that kind of traction, but it played a huge role in helping to assist me into transitioning to Travel Write Draw full time.
You've been doing this for 7 years. I'm sure you've had a lot of setbacks and things that just didn't go as you thought it would. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with setbacks, and how do you go up from that?
Yeah, it's almost, it makes me cringe to think 7 years, to be honest, because like those 4 before the last 3 was just like a blitzkrieg of setbacks. I started, when I started the blog, I was still a student. So I was really sort of sharing the journey as like an illustration student in New York at FIT and built like a nice little community of illustrators where we commented on each other's blogs and stuff like that. And then when I had to transition from student to finding a sponsored job in New York so I could stay here, the blog took a back seat. I mean, my dream of being here and being an illustrator suddenly became like the last thing I could even think about because I just needed to make sure that someone could help keep me here and hire me to work. I had to become a very overnight graphic designer type hybrid with illustration and get really good with my computer skills because like that's what the market needed at the time. Yeah. And just dealing with those hurdles of, okay, so I've come here to be an illustrator, but I have to work full time for someone else in order to stay. But my whole reason for coming here was to get out of that life. And like, how am I going to make this happen? I can't even worry about my craft and perfecting my craft because I'm so consumed in just trying to stay. And then how do I transition out of that so that I can then have my own company and live this life I've always dreamed of. So in terms of dealing with those setbacks, I mean, you just have to. You have to write your list of like, here's step 1 through. Don't write step 1 through 100. Write step 1 through 3 because that's manageable between now and the end of this week or next week. And then write your next step 1 through 3. Like, don't inundate and overwhelm yourself before you've even started. Having faith, having a support system, making sure that you're still, even in the worst of times, something that happened to me was I was sponsored by a company and then the company basically, I latched onto a sinking ship. So I almost like couldn't go home for Christmas because if I left the country, this happened like just before the holidays. And if I'd left the country, I wouldn't be able to get back in. When moments like that happen, you think like, this must be a sign, Meg, like just go home. Like this is just too difficult. Like I had stuff going on with my family. All of it was like just, it's time to pack it in was kind of the message that I felt like I was getting. But then when I still kept putting myself out there and trying with new interviews and things like that, and then ultimately getting the new job, I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep going and just see where this gets me. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So why automatically pull yourself out of the game is kind of my attitude, because if you keep trying, eventually something will stick.
If you give up, you've already lost. If you gave up then, you wouldn't be here right now living your dream, doing all of these things that you're doing. And it would have been a real shame for you and for a lot of people who follow you, who find inspiration in what you do. Right. And you don't realize the impact that you have. Some people are silent. You don't even know. There's people that do speak out and talk to you, but there are people who are quiet about it and they don't say it, but you do make an impact in what that would have been like if you didn't continue with what you're doing. If you could give yourself an advice before you even started this, what would it be?
I guess looking back, that just because something doesn't exist doesn't mean that it can't come to be. You know what I mean? Like any trailblazer that you see out there was maybe the first of their kind. You can't be scared to be a trailblazer. Don't think that because it's not out there already that like there's no place for it. Like you'll create that place for it. And I'm still, to this day, as I'm thinking about the future and the evolution of what I'm doing, I have to think like, well, just because that's not out there, there are no rules. No one's going to say no. Like, who's the person who's authoritating life saying you can't do that? You can't make that choice. No, I don't believe in limits. If I had believed in limits, I wouldn't have gotten to this place. So I think just believing in yourself, having faith in your journey, having faith in your dream, and also knowing that like a dream is only a dream until you have a plan. It can't be real. Yeah. It's still just a dream. So like that's as fundamentally important as having the dream itself. Like it's great to have a vision, but you got to have a plan. So I guess my advice would be twofold: to not be afraid to be a trailblazer, and knowing that if it doesn't exist doesn't mean there's not a place for it. And two, to just always have a plan to marry with the dream, to make it a reality.
There is an idea, right? There's always an idea and a dream. But I think what most people lack, and I've had this too, is the plan to actually execute it, to actually get that goal and that dream. Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of times we're very unhappy, because we do have this dream, but the one thing that's always missing is the plan. If you have that plan and that dream, like if you put them together, like you said, it'll come together.
With regards to the plan, because I'm very much at that stage in my career now where it's about it's like the next level, and it's a new frontier. This is new territory. Like I built what I've built for the last 3 years of doing this full time, and it's gotten me as far as it's gotten me, and it's been great. But I've outgrown sort of that formula and how I've been operating and running my business. So it's like the next level, and what does that look like? And you can't answer all your questions. So go to experts. Even if it means paying someone to come in and help you resituate things, or find a more efficient way to do it, or reach out to people that are, further along in their journey that could advise you if they're willing to. Get a mentor. I mean, there are people out there that can help you put your dream into reality. I like to get as many opinions as I can. And it's not about being like a procrastinator. It's just like, okay, now I can step forward with an informed decision because I've considered it from all sides, and I'm prepared. For those that are struggling to put it into motion, look for courses, look for mentors, look for career people who would be willing to answer some of your questions. I mean, even when someone wasn't willing to go to coffee with me, they would still answer an email that I sent. You know what I mean? So you just got to put it out there, and the answers will come from various sources, but they'll come together.
Talking about mentors and people that you've asked questions, I'm sure you've done that a lot, because that's how we learn. Yeah. What has been the worst advice that you have ever gotten throughout this journey?
I mean, I had a lot of people that just didn't believe in me. You know, when I was working full time, especially, I can remember the head of the design department just being like, well, illustration's just a hobby. And I was like, well, no, actually, because now I make twice what I did working, full time here. So it's definitely a bona fide career. And especially today, maybe then, like things have obviously changed a great deal as a result of like social media and having like a devoted following that really engages with what you do. But yeah, I think those sort of doubt, if you're going to be the illustrator, you're not going to be the traveler. They're going to send someone else to travel. And these preconceived ideas of what is actually possible. Like, who says that I can't? Why? I'll get a lot of pushback even from my parents, God bless them. I mean, they're the best and they have ultimately always supported me. But because of what they're used to in their generation, they didn't always think the things that I'm doing now were totally possible. Eventually, it got to the point where my dad would just say, well, that's great to have those dreams, Meg, but like, you make sure that like you can get paid and support yourself because I'm not funding this. So for all the, you know, outrageous aspirations that are not so outrageous anymore, but it's like, well, you want to travel the world? Okay, great. Find a way to do it because I'm not footing the bill. So so in a way, like it may not have been negative advice necessarily, but just like getting that kind of pushback puts you in a position where you can either like internalize that and then accept it and be like, okay, I'm not going to try then, and like go back down into your comfort zone, or you can challenge that. I think persistence, in order to be in this industry and to work for yourself as an entrepreneur, like persistence is 1000% the key. Sometimes the talent is outweighed by just straight up persistence.
That's really true. And then talking about the boundaries, right, that people talk about, it's because it's the boundaries that they placed on themselves. Yeah. And they don't know what you're capable of and what each of us individually are capable of. And the only boundaries that we end up getting is ourselves. Yeah. Honestly, you know, my parents are the same way, your parents, and most of our parents are the same way. It's because back then artists, you couldn't really make money as you do now. So now with all of the technology, there's so much more available for you as an artist. And actually right now, if you're an artist, that's a plus for you. Now they want you to be creative. They want you to do all of these things.
Skills.
Yeah. The chosen career that you have now, how did you finance your career before it even took off? Yeah. And how do you continue to live right now?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a really important question because I often get asked about that transition. Like, how do you do it? And looking back, because it's hard when you work full time, especially in a city like New York or London and San Francisco, where the cost of living is so high, exorbitantly high, and obviously taxes take a big chunk of your paycheck, and you're paid biweekly or whatever. I mean, it's hard to get ahead. You're just sort of living check to check to like cover your rent and cover your food and your entertainment, and maybe like, you know, every now and then you're treating yourself to a holiday or like a new purchase or something. So when I was about to leave my job, I don't even know. I'm thinking back on that time. I mean, when I first left my job, I was still living in a 3-person apartment in the West Village. So I wasn't living alone. So those costs were divided. And I was definitely terrified how I was going to cover rent month to month. But I kind of got a little bit lucky with the timing right from the start, because as soon as I left, I had work lined up. I think this is an important point to raise. I didn't cut the ties with my full-time position until I knew that there were things coming in lined up that it gave me the courage and confidence that like it's gonna be okay. And I did have a line of credit, a family that was willing to step in to cover me. I'd have to pay it back, but if I needed to like get an extra hand just to cover a month or something like that, I could rely on other people. But I think most people have this idea where it's like you go from security to nothing, and I wouldn't advise that. I don't think it has to be an all or nothing transition. I think you build a little on the side, whatever is capable. You know, if you're doing a commission on weekends, like I worked a lot. I never had free time. I never really saw my friends towards like the end of working full time and transitioning into this, because my weekends were the time to do the illustration jobs while I was like working full time. Yeah. And so for me, the transition was a slower one. I didn't quit until I knew that I had things coming in. So then when I did start, and then with social media working the way it does, where you do one project, which leads to another project. So they just all snowballed into, where it is today. And I would say, even if you do start to make money, you don't have to be extravagant, because you have to make sure you cover yourself for your low times. And if you need to take a step back because God forbid something happens with your health or your family, or you just need like a mental break or whatever, like save it for a rainy day. Don't go blowing all your money just because things are great now, because you don't know what the economy will look like tomorrow, particularly as a creative. So
yeah, and I feel like a lot of people have that misconception where you know what, I hate my job and I just left it. I'm sure there's a lot of things that you don't enjoy with what you're doing now, but because you love it so much, everything else trumps that. And then with the 9 to 5, sometimes you have to make sacrifices to get to where you are right now, and the 9 to 5 is.
I'll add to this too. Like, one of the hardest things that I had to let go of with the 9 to 5 was that, like, I worked in a company where I genuinely loved the founder of the company, my coworkers. Like, I had a family every day, and I'm not from New York. My family is in Toronto. So I don't have that support system built in here. I have my friends, but they've got their stuff going on, and they, live with their partners or whatever. And like, I don't see them every day. So just adjusting from having that sort of built in sounding board and network of people who, like, you come in on a Monday and it's, how was your weekend? Let's go get a coffee. Let's catch up. Let's talk about this. Like, you can share your stresses with them. It's like built-in therapy every day. Whereas, like, I work for myself. I spend a great deal of time alone. So yeah, there's pluses and minuses to both of them. And I know I've heard a lot of people say how hard it is to adjust to leaving kind of like that family network behind. Like, that's not an easy adjustment. It's now I'm like, I crave the silence because, like, I'm just so used to it. It's how I stay, like, calm and centered. But before, it was just like, where is everybody? Like, where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Help. Like, it's not easy.
It's actually harder when you're gone and on your own, right? Because now you have no set schedule unless it's a schedule you set for yourself. Yeah. You don't have somebody telling you have a deadline or a reminder every time. Nothing. So yeah, once you want to branch out into this, you just have to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. Yeah. And you have to know yourself if it's the right fit for you. Right. With everything that's been happening the last few years, there's so many things that has happened already to you because of all of the struggles and all of the amazing stuff that you've been doing. What has been the proudest moment so far for you?
Yeah, I wouldn't assign it to any one job, because there's just so many projects that I've loved and take a lot of pride in having done them. But I would say building this, like, little universe for myself, which, like we mentioned earlier, there was no cookie cutter job description for traveling fashion illustrator who, like, runs their own brand now, that didn't exist. And I built it. It's like the expression, build it and they will come kind of thing. Like, I didn't know I could do this until I was actually doing it. And then I started attracting clients that quite literally were, like, making stories around travel, write, draw. Like, my first CN Traveler opportunity was in Bermuda, and Katie, the girl that hired me, she was already, like, a fan of what I was doing on the platform on Instagram, but basically kind of, like, designed the story around this, for me to go and illustrate my way through this destination, and to, like, write sort of journal style entries to describe, like, meeting local artisans and tasting the local food and all the beautiful colors and things like that. And it was like, whoa, like, I just put this out there, like, it took me a while to even take it seriously, like, travel, write, draw. Like, I'd almost cringe when I hear someone say my blog name, like, oh God, it's so embarrassing. And now I'm just kind of like, travel, write, draw, look it up. No, I mean that in, like, the least, yeah. But no, I take a lot of pride in it. To me, I am proud now to say, like, I founded Travel, Write, Draw. So I think definitely the proudest moment is that I did it. I'm here. I'm traveling and illustrating and writing and contributing to my dream brands. Like that's happening. And I know the next step, and I've been thinking and dreaming of it since the start of this blog. And now as I'm getting closer to it, I'm like, holy smokes. I hope it will go well, and that I can look back on the next 3 years and think like, I did it, like the next chapter, you know?
It must seem so surreal to see that, to see your articles in these huge magazines, to see your work in like huge hotels, and someone wants to buy them and actually own them, you know?
Even now, like there's, I was working so much between January 2017 to this summer, to the point that like I was losing my hair. Like that's been a really like terrible side effect of stress. And running your business is that it's like physically manifested into like just mass shedding. So I knew that I kind of needed to take a little bit of a step back, and I went into a travel period of like August where I was gone for 5 weeks, like all over Asia. And that's kind of where the loss really started, because I think it was the first time I'd slowed down in like 6 months or something, or I mean, really like 2.5 years, but a very, very intense push in 2017. It just kind of like hit a new height. And then coming off of that and like stepping off the hamster wheel of, and this isn't to knock any of those opportunities, because I'm so lucky I had any of them at all, but just that lifestyle of like, you can't even look up because you're just running. Yeah. And your feet aren't on the ground. You're just flying. And so when I look back on it now, like it really does impact me when I think like, I actually did that. It did not sink in at all until now. I'm like, oh my, like what? Like that was me? Like how did that even happen? You know what I mean? Like now it's really starting to sink in.
It's really good to have that moment where you can actually enjoy the fruits of your labor, because a lot of times when you are in that moment and you're doing all of these things, you don't have that time to step back, and because you're never going to have that back, and just to take the time to enjoy the work that you're doing.
Appreciate that, and like respect yourself for it, you know? Like that's part of modern culture that we really need to get a handle on. I think it's a personal thing too. Like you have to personally acknowledge that when you look back on all the things that you've written down that you wanted to accomplish in your life, the minute you get there, you're like, what's next? And if you can make the transition from thinking about what's next to like how you want to feel on a day-to-day, suddenly that takes precedent. Because the list of accolades and accomplishments and like, well, I want to see this country, and well, then you got back from that, and I want to work with this client, and I did that. So like whatever it is, like you cannot get on that cycle of thinking, because it will always be what's next, versus I take a lot of pride and savor the fact that like I wake up in my own home and in a space that I've created and designed that really reflects me as a person, and like I feel empowered and inspired every day. I mean, some days I do really feel like garbage, but I would say for the most part, it's just take a step back and really appreciate those things.
You obviously, from what I can see, have found your real passion and your purpose, and you're still working at it. Yeah. How do you know? How does a person know? And then how did you find out that this is what you were really meant to do? What do you define as passion, right? Because we hear that a lot. Find your purpose and your passion. But what does that really mean, especially for you? How did you know that you found that?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, because I have friends who like really struggle with that. They're like, I just don't have that one thing. Like you're an artist and like, you know, that's what you love, but I love beauty and I love this and I love that. And I honestly, I mean, this has been in me since the day I was born. The love of art, the connection I have with a paintbrush and paint. I mean, nothing can replace that experience for me. It is like breathing. In terms of like other people finding their passion, I don't know that everyone has that one thing. And that I don't even mean that, and that's not to be discouraging. I just think that it doesn't have to be one specific thing. Maybe it's a balance of things. I heard recently, I wasn't at this conference, but I heard recently through a friend who attended it, where Rihanna, who I love, was on a panel talk, and she was asked to give like a good piece of advice. And what she said was, be relentless in the pursuit of who you are. And when you find it, be unapologetic. And I just love that. I think Bad Gal Riri is badass, like to the core. And I think that's something that's really struck a chord with me right now. It's just like, you don't have to apologize for being who you are. I'm a good person. If I'm not going to be liked by everybody, whatever. Like you go with the people who do. And who am I? What do I stand for? And I would suggest that for everybody, whether it's a passion, whether it's a calling, whether it's, I want to try this, I want to try that, I want to try 50,000 things. Embrace that. Yeah. Don't put the pressure that you have to find one thing. Just explore who you are and be the most like open, well-rounded, evolved version of yourself like every day, and continue to grow in that.
Well, you're kind of living it, right? Because you didn't choose one thing. You chose travel, writing, and drawing. Yeah. So, and I definitely believe in that. And I also believe that not everybody was meant to do just one thing in their life. Mm-hmm. And you live a certain amount of years in your life. And sometimes you're one thing in a few years and another thing in a few. You do. And that's how you grow as a person. So now what are you working on today that's really exciting to you?
To be honest, because it's still so much in like the works and things like that, I don't want to say too much about like what's coming next, other than I'm just extremely excited about what's in the works, and I'm like planting the seeds and getting things in line. I'll say expansion, evolution, and yeah, one thing that like I wasn't able to maintain as a result of traveling so much and working so much as like as a one woman show with maybe a few people that advised me, was that I couldn't, make my work more available to more people. So like I'd really like to be able to do that. It upsets me to think that like when someone writes like, can I just want to buy, I want to go through your shop, I want to see this and that. Where am I supposed to refer these people? Like even if I've done a collaboration with another brand and those products are then not accessible to buy to them, it's like, that's a real miss. So, but it takes time to get those things in line. It was hard to, when you're first starting out and you want to just get out there and grow and make a living, you can't necessarily focus on your print shop or whatever. So as I've gotten as far as I've gotten doing things the way that I've been doing them, and now it's just about expansion. So stay tuned.
Yeah. That's going to be really exciting. I can't wait to see what happens there. But before I ask you the last question, okay. I know one thing that you said you don't really get asked much, and I'm going to ask you this, is relationships, right? You're a beautiful woman. Thanks. But you travel a lot, right? And you own a business. So that must be really hard for you to keep, right? Yeah. So how are you able to do that? How are you able to...
I don't know. No, I would say that like you have to really make a concerted effort to put yourself out there. I mean, if I had all the answers to this, I think my life would be a lot simpler. For one, I think, being a dynamic, like multi-passionate individual, I'm attracted to that in other people. And like I tend to go for the kind of guy who has got their own thing going on, like business wise, and is entrepreneurial as well. And I kind of tend to look up to them in like this sort of mentor way. Like I like looking up to the person that I'm with. I think that I can learn from you, and look up to you and respect you. I think respect is so important. Men and women are so different. I think men, when they're focused in something, it's one thing, right? And then when they finally like leave the office, then they're like, hey babe, how are you? I'm just like, where were you the last like 14 hours? Women tend to be different. I think that we have the capability by nature to multitask. Like when I'm even in the throes of like meetings, businesses, like business decisions, calls, contracts, invoices, creating artwork, still top of mind for me is like, why haven't I heard from him? You know what I mean? Like, what the hell is he doing? Where did he disappear to? And like, everything will be fine at the end of the day and we meet up and it's all great. But then like the in-between was just like, how did that? So listen, I haven't been able to resolve this issue. It's still a work in progress. But like, I ultimately believe that I have to, at least, that like, you know, when it's right. And it could be the right person, wrong time. It could be the right time, wrong person. Yeah. And it's just like, I've gotten pickier as I've gotten older because I know myself so well. And there's a lot less that I'll put up with. Like, I don't put up with bad behavior. I don't put up with being belittled or treated disrespectfully or like a second afterthought, or like, my career is as important. And yeah, and it's just going to take time to find the right, you know, fit with that.
So I guess no Tinder for you, right? But that's true. It's just like the way you handle your business and you're so careful with it and you just love it so much. That's how a relationship should be as well. You know, you shouldn't be settling for something that you're not completely passionate about.
Like, I had this conversation with someone not that long ago, and I was like, if I've made the choice to be here with you, like to drop my paints, and like, that's a huge deal because I've cut in this time of my passion, of like my baby, you know, to like, you know, make room for you. So it better be worth it if I'm like taking this time away. And like, I have no issue with doing that and making room for somebody. It's just, you better be doing the same. You better be meeting me in the middle because this isn't a one-way street.
We can have a whole other lot of conversations. So if our listeners want to know more about you, where can they find you?
So obviously Instagram, I'm on that daily at Travel Right Draw, and I'm on my Insta stories too. Like, I'm very active in there, and I definitely like write back to people's direct messages and things. I don't blog as often, but the blog, obviously, Travel Right Draw, and then my website, meaganmorrison.com, which is like my portfolio site. Hit me up.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Meagan, for having me in this lovely, lovely home. I'm really appreciative of this because this is gorgeous.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meagan. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Meagan. Make sure to visit theoffbeatlife.com. Again, that's theoffbeatlife.com to get access to an extended interview with Meagan where she gives us her tips and tricks on how to become a successful illustrator. Love a good audiobook as much as I do? Of course you do. Well, you're in luck because I have teamed up with Audible.com to give you a 30-day trial for free. Make sure to visit offbeatbook.com. Again, that's offbeatbook.com to get that incredible trial.